This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1003 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season's right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. As you know, I'm drafting over there, and I'm documenting things with Becoming a Best Ball Bro, so you can use the information from that show to help you out as well. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million. And get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headline contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Analyzing schedules is always a controversial topic in fantasy football. On one hand, no one's played a game yet. We don't know exactly how good or bad certain matchups are. Or I should say, we're not very confident in knowing. But I don't see the exercise of forecasting hard and easy schedules as any different than forecasting offensive line play or pass rates or any other thing that we're forecasting in fantasy football. And doing this each year, this exact exercise, has been really, really helpful. Anyone who's listened to this episode in the past can probably attest to that. Just look at last year as an example. I brought up Washington's easier start to the season across their first 4 games. And who knows if that helped the passing attack do what they did last year. They got off on the right foot. Regardless, though, they faced the Bucs, the Giants, the Bengals, and the Cardinals to kick off their season. Jaden Daniels averaged 23.4 points per game during that stretch. He was 2 points per game lower throughout the rest of the season. And those were the first 4 games of his entire NFL career. Or there's the Chargers. I talked up their first 2 games of the season because they faced the Raiders and the Panthers last year. And I mentioned that backfield in particular. And as we know, J.K. Dobbins got off to a really hot start last year. Now, the one miss from last year was probably the Green Bay passing attack. And now they had a really soft schedule through about week 9. Though I guess Jordan Love did technically average more points per game during that split than out of it last year. And Love was banged up too. Regardless, I would imagine listeners have gotten something from this show in the past, because I know it's been helpful for me in particular. And I'm typically creating content that interests me as a fantasy player as well. Just like you, I'm trying to win some leagues. To me, though, getting players who have good early season schedules can help your team get off to a hot start. And it can help your team simply increase in value. There's also nothing worse than drafting a starter who underperforms to start the season, even if there's a schedule-based reason for that. It's not easy to fully grasp that as it's happening. So today, we're going to look at some early season schedules for fantasy assets to see if we should give them a very slight boost in our rankings or maybe a little bit of a downgrade. This is a tiebreaker more than anything else for these guys, but it's still something to keep in mind for all the reasons I just talked through. Now, I'm going to split today's episode up into 2 groups, rushing attacks and passing attacks. We'll go through all of the rushing attacks who may get off to bad and good starts, and then we'll move to passing games. And of course, I try to approach this mathematically and logically, or as much as I could. A lot of times, people do this analysis by looking at last season's numbers. I don't find that to be as useful. Instead, I'm using a few sources: projected win totals for each team, Sharp Football's front 7 rankings, which obviously just aren't focused on run stopping, but they are helpful, and then PFF's secondary rankings. Those all help me to find some good and bad schedules for these fantasy assets. All right, we good to go? Let's do this. One player I've mostly faded this offseason is Brian Robinson. He's not much of a pass catcher. I don't see him as a special player. And for him to really give you a ceiling in a PPR setting, he's likely going to have to score a lot of touchdowns. And that's definitely possible in this offense. It's just not something I want to bank on, especially when there are other players in that range that I just like more, mostly at the other positions. Actually, my running back ranking of Robinson isn't that far off of the market. But I do worry about my lack of exposure given the Commanders' early season schedule. That's not so much a best ball take, but it is a season-long one, a managed league one. Washington opens up their season against the Giants, Packers, Raiders, and then the Falcons. The Giants have a strong front seven, but they also have a low win total, and they're 6.5-point underdogs in Washington in that week 1 game. Then it's the Packers and their bottom 10 front seven, according to Sharp Football. Then it's a Raiders team that has a 5.5 win total. So the potential for another positive game script for Washington. And then it's a beatable Falcons team that ranks dead last in the front seven rankings. And honestly, they won't face a top half team in terms of front seven rankings until week 7. But I think you have to feel a little bit better about using Robinson to kick off the year. None of those first 4 matchups are even remotely scary. So don't be surprised if Robinson's a sell candidate for me towards the end of September. Now, another player that I'm not that into at cost is Chuba Hubbard. And just like Brian Robinson and the Commanders, the Panthers have a nice start to their schedule too. Which, of course that's the case. I can't wait to hear it from people after the first month of the season. Carolina's opening schedule is arguably the best for any running backs in the league. It's Jacksonville, Arizona, Atlanta, and then New England. 4 teams with bottom 10 front sevens according to Sharp Football. And they're all teams who aren't like elite. Or at least we're not projecting them to be elite teams. Which means Hubbard could see a lot of touches if a negative game script never hits. So I'm actually anticipating Chuba Hubbard to have a really strong start to the season. My concern is more on the receiving side for him, but if the Panthers are in these good scripts, then there won't be that much of an issue to kick off the year. Now there's also veteran James Conner who get off to a really hot start. The Cardinals get the Saints and the Panthers in weeks 1 and 2. Those are 2 teams that rank in the bottom 5 and front 7 rankings, and they're 2 teams where at least a neutral game script is possible against the Cardinals. New Orleans hasn't even named their quarterback starter yet, and that week 2 game against the Panthers is in Arizona. So if you want more of like a middle round anchor at running back to get off to a hot start, and then you just kind of want to wait for the inevitable injuries to occur to build out your running back room, James Conner actually makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say on the flip side, there aren't many obvious teams to call out, if I'm being totally honest. I think the Bears' start to the season is maybe a little bit iffy for running backs, and same with the Jets. But I'm not super concerned on the negative side with the rushing attacks. So let's focus our attention now to the passing side. There's been some positive camp buzz surrounding Drake May and that Patriots passing attack, and I think they could get off to a hot start. New England faces Vegas, Miami, Pittsburgh, and Carolina across their first 4 games. According to PFF's secondary rankings, those teams' secondaries are 32nd, 29th, 16th, and 30th entering the season. When looking only at the first 4 weeks through this lens, New England's tied for the best schedule for any team in football. And the team that they're tied with is another one that we should shout out here, and that's Michael Penix and the Falcons. Atlanta actually gets a sweet schedule basically through week 8 this year. Here's where their opponents rank through that time in secondary rankings. 22nd, 27th, 30th, 28th, and then there's a bye week, and then they get the 14th, 23rd, and 29th ranked secondaries. The Falcons won't see a tough matchup on paper until week 9 when they face the Patriots. Now, I'm not as high on Michael Penix as the other sophomore quarterbacks, but he's a sneaky streamer to start the season. And with Darnell Mooney currently banged up, Drake London could go absolutely nuts to start the year too. And at the very least with Michael Penix, he could be a decent week 1 streamer because Atlanta faces Tampa Bay. That game has a 48.5 point total. Now, I called out James Conner for his rushing matchups across the first chunk of the season, but the Cardinals just have good matchups in general. New Orleans, Carolina, San Francisco, they each rank 20th or worse in secondary rankings. I think the fear with Kyler Murray is that there's not a ton of shootout potential in week 1 and 2, week 1 especially. Carolina might surprise us offensively this year. But then in week 3, we know the 49ers can put up points. So keep an eye on Kyler Murray just as you are with James Conner. Now, I'm slightly concerned about the Bears running backs for the first chunk of the season, but the passing attack might be in a good spot. Chicago opens their season against the Vikings, Lions, Cowboys, Raiders, a bye week, and then Washington. There's some high-powered offenses in there. The toughest secondary matchup on paper is Detroit, but the Bears could also play in catch-up mode against them. That's a good Lions offense. But aside from that, 4 of their first 5 games are against the 27th, 31st, 32nd, and 28th ranked secondaries. And they all have interesting shootout potential too. It just makes me a little bit more excited for Caleb Williams, despite his struggles early on in training camp. Now, there weren't many rushing attacks to call out on the negative side, but I've got some passing attacks for you. I got 2 of them. One of them is Kansas City, unfortunately. We're hoping that Patrick Mahomes pushes the ball downfield more this year, that the offense gets going again. But they're starting the year with arguably 3 top 10 matchups in a bad way for the passing attack. They'll start with the Chargers, then the Eagles, then the Giants, and then the Ravens. That's not the easiest spot to be in, with at least the Eagles and the Ravens coming in with really strong secondaries this year. And you could very easily argue that the Chargers are in the top 10 too. So Kansas City's passing attack, I'm a little bit nervous to start the season. And then there's Cam Ward and the Titans, who face the Broncos to kick off his NFL career. So good luck with that. After Denver, Tennessee faces the Rams, Colts, and Texans. The Texans secondary is really strong, like top 5 strong. And the other 2 matchups, they're not necessarily great on paper either, although they are more middle of the road. But it's hard to see Cam Ward as a streaming choice at the end of your season-long drafts this year, given that matchup against Denver. And things aren't even great during the first month of the season. And that does unfortunately extend to Calvin Ridley too. Someone that I've been drafting a good bit this year in best ball. Just looking at the schedule, I think we're going to see more of a second half surge for this Tennessee Titans passing attack, which also makes sense because they're being led by a rookie quarterback. So those are the 2 passing attacks that I'm most concerned about. Another 2 honorable mentions would probably be Miami and Detroit. It's just not quite as obvious as Kansas City and Tennessee, at least in my eyes. So to recap, for the rushing attacks, we got Brian Robinson and the Commanders, Chuba Hubbard and the Panthers, James Conner and the Cardinals, all looking good to start the year. And we might want to be a little bit fearful for the Bears and the Jets. On the passing front, favorable matchups are there for the Patriots, Falcons, Cardinals, and Bears. And then we should be a little bit more concerned about the Chiefs and the Titans. And then I know what all of you guys are thinking now. You want some defensive streamers. You want some defenses to pick up in the last round of your draft. So here's a very, very quick rundown. The Commanders get the Giants in week 1. They're already big home favorites. The Rams get the Texans in week 1 in that weak offensive line for Houston. And then they get Tennessee and Cam Ward, a rookie, in week 2. I think the Rams are probably the most attractive true dart throw defense in fantasy drafts this year. Now, Pittsburgh's going to get drafted earlier, especially in home leagues, but they do get the Jets and the Seahawks in weeks 1 and 2. Both of those teams have new quarterbacks. Both could show some offensive struggles out of the gate. And then Denver's obviously going to be drafted high because it's a great defense, but they do get Tennessee and Indianapolis to start the season, which are 2 offenses that we're probably going to target this year, at least the first half of the season. And that's also a low-key reason as to why you could go after like a J.K. Dobbins or R.J. Harvey as well. I could have shouted them out earlier with the running backs. And then the last defense, maybe you could get Arizona as sort of a risky candidate. They're going to get the Saints in week 1. We don't even know who the quarterback's going to be for New Orleans. And if they play well and you feel good about them, maybe they're a possibility in week 2 against Carolina. But at least in week 1, they're kind of an intriguing 5.5-point road favorite against the Saints. Now look, I know this episode wasn't as methodical, wasn't as mathematical as other episodes that I do. But I wanted to get you guys as much information about this as I could now because we're in late July and drafts are really going to start ramping up. And this information should be helpful. At the very least, you can use it as a tiebreaker, like I said earlier. When you're between a couple of guys, you don't know which one to pick, use these schedules as a tiebreaker. You want your team to get more valuable as soon as possible. And look, if you think this is all worthless, I feel you. We're all entitled to our own opinions. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. I've got Becoming a Best Ball Bro hitting your feeds tomorrow, and then a mailbag episode later in the week. Talk to you guys then.